In this screencast, I'll be walking you through an EventSentry version 3 installation and explaining some of the installation options as I go along. This is the first dialog of the installer. We're going to accept the license agreement, and I'm going to enter the license information now. In the next screen, we can specify the installation directory, the program files EventSentry directory by default. And here we have a few components to choose from. First one is the documentation, which is a Windows help format documentation of EventSentry. Then we have the built-in database, which is required for the reporting. And then we have the web reports, which is our actual web-based reporting engine. The built-in database is recommended for new users. It's based on PostgreSQL and is pretty easy to install. EventSentry takes care of the entire installation process for you, but we also support SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, as well as MySQL. We're going to leave everything here selected since this is the most common route. The first question is where the database is going to be installed. So the built-in database, of course, needs to be stored somewhere, and by default it goes into the data subdirectory of the EventSentry installation folder. If the firewall is enabled on the machine, then you can click yes here to create firewall rules to allow incoming traffic to port 5432, which is the default Postgres port. You can also move the database folder, of course, to a different location, to a larger disk drive, for example. In the next dialog, we have to choose the administrative password for the Postgres admin account. It's highly recommended that you choose a strong password here, since the admin does have access to all data that's stored in the database and also, of course, has the ability to remove data from the database. So I will enter a password here. This is, of course, not a secure password, but generally speaking, you want to use something secure here. Next question is, we're done with the database. Next question is about the web reports. By default, the web reports run on port 8080. Unless you have something else running on that port, we'd recommend to leave that as is. The administrative port, the service port, can in most cases be ignored, but it runs on port 8081 and is only accessible from the local machine. Again, we can create firewalls to allow traffic to port 8080 from remote hosts so that they can access the web reports. And that was it. That was all the first set of questions that the installer needs to set up the database and the web reports. So it's pretty straightforward in most cases, with the exception of the password for the administrative user for Postgres and for the location of the database possibly. You can just browse through the installer here with clicking next and next. So here we've got the installer at work. It's copying all the files. It's setting up the default configuration here. And since we chose to install the web reports as well, the web reports installer is going to run in the background as well here, right after the Postgres database is installed. The web reports are actually downloaded during the installation from our website. If you want to install EventSentry on a host that does not have access to the internet, then our customer area does have a link for you to download the web report separately. In that case, you can simply keep the web reports option unchecked during the installation and then run the web reports installer afterwards. It will yield the same result. You'll just be required to run the setup for the web reports manually, and it asks the same questions, basically just about the service port. We've made the installation, the download of the web report separate, so that those users who don't require them will get a smaller installer, and also because we have separate installers for Linux. So we fast forwarded here to skip some of the waiting here, but the installation usually doesn't take longer than about 3 minutes on the normal decent hardware here or virtual machine. So now the installer is done. We're going to click Finish, and now the EventSentry configuration assistant is automatically being launched by the installer. It's a separate application. The configuration assistant is also launched anytime you upgrade to a new release of EventSentry. And in this case, the configuration assistant updates the database schema to make sure that you have the latest schema, and also lets you configure any new features. So we're going to start next. We're going to keep the email alerts as is. We're going to keep the SMTP server empty. If you keep it empty, it will use the MX record for that domain to find the host, the email server. In this case, we'll just do this. The recipient, we'll just come up with a imaginary recipient here. Next question is about the database users. Since we did install the database, EventSentry uses two main service accounts, user accounts in the database, one that is used by the agents and one that's used by the web reports. Again, it's recommended that you use a strong password, or you can have EventSentry generate one for you, in which case it's recommended that you save those in a secure spot. You can enable an automatic database purge if you're using the built-in database. In this particular case, we have a purge running every night at 11 p.m. We're keeping days for 7 days, and of course this can be customized to anything. So for example, 30 days. And the max database size is not actually being enforced, but you will get an alert if the database size exceeds this limit. Heartbeat monitoring is generally recommended. Heartbeat monitoring monitors the uptime of any host through ping, and also allows you to monitor remote non-Windows machines with through SNMP. It's recommended that you use a Windows account here, a service account. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just moving on here with the local system account. Network services allow you to consolidate Syslog messages from remote hosts, again, switches, routers, Linux machines, FreeBSD, and so forth. And the same for SNMP traps, so you can consolidate SNMP traps and receive trap alerts by email from any SNMP device that supports sending out traps. And those are all the options we have. We're going to click Next. The configuration assistant will now create the database schema, the database and the schema for us on the fly, install all the services, and we should be all set. So the setup here was complete, no issues encountered. If there were any errors, they would be shown here with the ability to view a log file. And EventSentry is now installed. We can start the management console now to take a quick peek. The first question it asks us here is whether it's allowed, whether you allow the management console to transmit part of your license information to our website. That's then being used to automatically download any patches and display your maintenance agreement information right on the management console. Generally speaking, we recommend you hit yes here, but if you prefer not to transmit your license information, then you want to click no here, and you'll have to download the patch manually. So here we're running, we've got the online resources. We're going to close this for now. But EventSentry is now installed on this computer. Management console is all set up with the default settings. And to finish up, we're going to look at the web reports real quick. I've got a few buttons here. We've got a button here and a button up there in the quick access area. So we're going to open the web reports, and we're being transferred now to the setup of the web reports. Most everything is already preset, of course. We can hit the test connection button here to make sure our database is up and running, which it is. We'll move on here. SNMP, I'm going to leave that empty. And we are asked to create an initial first account. So I'm going to give this a password. This is our first and our administrative account. Keep in mind that we can also skip access control, but that of course is not recommended, because that will make the web-based reporting accessible to anyone on your network, which is not something you'd usually want. So we gotta keep access control enabled here. Click Get Started, and we are right here. You can already see some information being populated. We're collecting events. We've got database size of 12 megabytes, event logs being collected for 2 minutes, and a little bit of other information that's available, that's been collected here. And that's how quickly EventSentry can be installed and how easy it is. Very few things to configure, and you're up and running. Look for some other screencasts that show you how to deploy EventSentry and configure EventSentry. Thank you for watching.